now. Sean, thank you so much, Professor Sean. I really appreciate your time on ENCA this evening. So there's no doubt that the Biden administration, the approach will be more global. It won't take the approach that Trump took, which was more America first. What do you think this moment in America means for the globe?
I mean, just at a personal level, it's quite a relief to wake up this morning and see the back of Donald Trump. I think everybody, most people, perhaps not the 70-odd million that voted for Donald Trump, but I think most Americans share it. But I think two things to keep in mind. One is American politics is always local. So on the one hand, yes, it's true that it's going to be very different from how Donald Trump governed. But on the other hand, it is the case that if something is not working for American business, or if American lives, meaning soldiers, are not being engaged somewhere, and that means coming back in caskets. So those are the considerations I think that Americans take into account. At the same time, I have to say there definitely will be something like a return to the way that Barack Obama or Bill Clinton governed in the 1990s or in the early 2000s, so a much more multilateral approach. One of the first executive orders that Biden said he would sign is one on climate change. So I expect that to happen in like a day or two. I think there'll be a different approach around COVID and vaccines. So you might see locally, there'll be a much better science-based effort, but I think there will be perhaps a little bit more cooperation with the rest of the world.
So basically, we mustn't expect a lot of difference in approach from the Obama-Biden era when it comes to particularly foreign policy.
Right. So foreign policy, I think you're going to see the same kind of this idea of America as being exceptional, this kind of country on the hill, which is, even though the last couple of weeks showed us that they have very little to teach the rest of us about democracy, but I think you're still going to see that very proactive way of looking at the world, trying to show the rest of us, how we should do democracy. I think if you're viewing this from Africa, my sense would be that perhaps there'll be a return to the kind of security concerns that went with Obama and AFRICOM. I think energy policy, you might see a change on that, and you probably might see, people might be disappointed, for example, with Museveni being re-elected in Uganda. You'll see that security concerns might trump again concerns about democracy.
Biden spoke about restoring the democracy and just restoring the image of the United States. Where do you think, in fact, let me first ask this, how much damage do you think has been done to brand USA at the global stage?
I mean, I think there were people who've always known that, the American dream, the notion of America as this kind of ideal is manufactured, that it's very much sort of manufactured in movies, and that, once you step beyond sort of the lights and you see in a sense like the real America, what you might see is the massive inequality, the rapacious capitalism. So, some of that, the doubt that people have about the U.S. is already there.
Yeah.
But I think Barack Obama did a lot to sort of manage, how people outside view the U.S. It was sort of an aspirational country. A black man could become president. I think you're right, Donald Trump did irreparable damage to that. I think it's going to be really hard, especially also the way that the U.S. have been dealing with two major crises. One, a crisis around COVID, a crisis around policing, and racism. For many people outside the U.S. will look at it and think, that's not the same U.S. That I know before. So there's a lot of work for the Biden administration to do that.
Yeah. He focused a lot on unity, promising Americans that he will be the president for all Americans. He said, and I quote, "I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as those who did." Do you think he did enough in his inaugural speech to convince the people, the white supremacists that he spoke about, and how that needs to be defeated? Do you think he's done enough to also convince over 70 million Americans that voted for Trump to believe in his administration and give him a chance?
I think any president who comes to power, your sort of very first public statement is to do the statement of unity, to project yourself as the leader for everybody. I mean, otherwise, why would you claim to govern a country, you're not governing a party.
Yeah.
You're governing a country. I think that's the same case in South Africa even. But I think it's going to be very hard. Many of these people that support Trump, the sort of vaunted 70 million that Trump likes to hold up as the people supporting him, I think for a lot of them, the legitimacy that they might have had in the political system, in the electoral system, in the idea that America will deliver to them, I think a lot of that has been damaged by Donald Trump. We're living in a time now where people don't even trust facts anymore. So I think there's a really a big job for Joe Biden to do here. The best thing he can do is through action. I think that the country is currently facing a health crisis. It's facing an economic crisis, and if he does well on both those particular areas, because those are local issues, those are things that people vote about here, then I think he would have done some of that. But at the same time, it's also true that this kind of racism that we're seeing in the U.S. right now is not new. Yeah. I mean, after all, this is a country that had a system similar to apartheid, Jim Crow. It then reformed itself, through social movements, demanding political change in the 1960s, and then it went into it backslid again through Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and others, George W. Bush. So I'm not surprised by the racism that is here, and you're right. It's going to be very hard for somebody like for somebody like Joe Biden to do as he claims to unite the U.S. again.
Yeah. Do you expect Trump to come back in some form? I mean, when he was addressing, his family members, some of his staff members, when he was leaving for Florida before he got on Air Force One, he indicated that he may be back in another form. Do you think he may run again in a couple of years? That's if, of course, the impeachment trial doesn't succeed in the Senate.
I mean, he's made it clear that he's going to form another political party. I think he talked about this thing called the Patriot Party, and many of those people who went to the Capitol, many of these 70 million, I think they might go to his party. But again, there's also the pool of the Republican Party. If there's a split within the Republican Party between those two, Patriot Party and the Republican Party, that's not good for conservatives. In the American political system, you generally rely there's sort of contest between these two major parties. There's been attempts on the left by the Democratic Socialists, for example, and on the right by the so-called Tea Party to split or to break up that monopoly of those two parties. But it's been very difficult because of the way the system is set up. I mean, I think most people feel that there'll be a trial for Donald Trump. I don't know how much whether he'll be impeached and whether he'll end up not being able to run for office again. I think it's highly unlikely after the damage, and I'm talking here about the 400,000 people who have died of COVID, the more than 2 million that have been infected, Americans living in, an economic crisis, for people to wanting to turn back to someone like Trump. I think what might happen actually is you might see the emergence of these other kinds of figures, more kind of polished, slick, younger. Josh Hawley, he's a congressman from the Midwest. Matt Gaines is from Florida. So these kind of young, white characters running for office, speaking in full sentences, not writing in capital letters on Twitter, but understanding like how modern media works, with nice haircuts while spewing racism and offensive politics. So I think that's much more of a danger in American politics here.
All right. Professor Shaun Jacobs, I really appreciate your time. Associate Professor of International Affairs at the New School.